Wanderers.
Buzz, this is Houston.
Hello everybody, this is Namii Mercury of Mercurii Media, and today I will be talking about the mission behind Mercurii Media and ultimately the direction we are headed as a company, as an organization, and as a force all its own. So to understand Mercurii Media, you must understand the basic principles of the astrological influence of Mercury, which is ultimately an archetypal influence of its own, which correlates to the Roman god Mercury and the Greek god Hermes. This corresponds to the messenger force, the exchange between person to person, person to environment, the transformative sort of alchemical potency of ideas and of media and news and stories and information. It is that flow between one thing to the next. It is not defined by the thing itself, but by those little links between one force to the next, and how those links sort of change the outcome or change the expression of things. It's got a very potent, transformative power in that you can imagine this and think about this as expressed, for example, how the world transformed after the printing press. And after that happened, power was sort of decentralized from the monarchy, from the church. It was brought more to the people. And why was this? Because the people gained access to information. They gained access to new worldviews, new perceptions, and they suddenly had the opportunity to express their views and deliver their views in a very systematized way, and also to have other people see their views and comprehend their views and be transformed by their views. And suddenly the overarching narrative was no longer controlled because the individual could contribute to it. The individual could spread information. The individual could provide their view. It was no longer under the jurisdiction of the monarchy or the church. They no longer had the control where they were the ones who approved what was put out, or what narratives or what views or what discoveries were allowed to be released, because they wanted to keep with a certain power structure. So understand that communication, information, revelation, and the agent of perception and realization is always an agent of power and internal autonomy, sovereignty. And fast forward from the printing press, you get the advent of television, computers, all this sort of happening within the past century. All these new forms of media, which are highly electric in nature and involve transmission. And so you have radio, television, and just recently, the computer and the internet. Everything back to radio and television. There was a sort of explosion in terms of entertainment, an explosion in terms of the nowness of that which we had access to, the nowness of ideas, the nowness of viewing, the nowness of reporting on things that were happening in current events and things like that. So we didn't have to wait so long to hear a report on something through a book or even a publication. You could hear it from the instantaneous transmission of the radio or the instantaneous transmission of television. So the general transfer of knowledge became much more concentrated to the general public, to the minds of the people. What it did when this happened was it took the information that we used to process through journalism, through newspapers and publications like that, and it allowed it to become that much more instantaneous and absorbed in a much more saturated concentrated way, which influence the very networks of our mind and how we process things. For example, if you think of the difference between conceptually absorbing a newspaper report about a battle or a revolution versus seeing that visually and taking it in on a television or taking it in auditorially and hearing the nuance of fear and emotion in the reporter's voice, which hits upon your limbic system at a much faster rate. It does not need to be processed through your mind, and it's just immediately triggered because we are communicating to each other through our senses in a way that is no longer abstract. You can understand that it would significantly change how we perceive global events. It does instigate a much deeper compassion and empathy, and you understand that this effect ripples not only in visceral, sort of hard realities, but in things that generally influence our view of the world and the paradigms that we have access to. It influences how we see the world as a whole. It alters that in a very fundamental way. How we form this coherent picture, or rather narrative, of what is happening beyond our personal lives. So it expands to a much broader realm where we are also brought up to that place and into that sort of expansion. And back then it was very much delegated by forces, but it was still elevating in the sense that it made us see outside of our limited scope. It made us see beyond our neighborhoods. It made us see beyond our what was right in front of us. It took us into new lands, into new domains in a very visually stimulated way, or auditorially stimulated. Media then begins to diverge in one direction, which is more commentary on the world and commentary on culture and commentary on current events, and then entertainment, which comes out in music and shows and all those things that began to flourish in a sense of their decentralization. You no longer had to be physically present in order to consume entertainment. And both of these directions, the direction of the commentary, which was more rooted in what was actually happening, in the direction of entertainment, which was rooted in fantasy and imagination and conveyance of the essential human emotions. Both of these strongly influenced us. They strongly influenced us and our innate sort of palette of experience. They transformed us in a way. They delivered us a sort of new relation to the world around us. And you have to understand these are very subtle dimensions of change. They occur over a longer scale of time to alter the way we relate to other people, the way we relate to reality as a whole, the way we relate to our internal power and our internal autonomy, because they transform this consumption of media, this consumption of exchange between one point to the next in a way that is not rooted in physical presence or in observing what is right in front of us. It sort of elevates the capacity of our mentality to envision beyond what is right in front of us. It elevates our mind to understand the world on a greater scale and understand the emotional ocean of unconscious on a greater scale. It was very transformative. But it was not even the beginning, because you move into the information age. And my God, internet revolutionized things so fast that it was almost like a blink of the eye and everything was changed. And we haven't even actually picked up on how much things have changed in terms of our internal conception, in terms of our internal relation to the world as a whole, in terms of our internal direction of power. You see, ultimately, every single one of those times, whether it was controlled by a process or whether it was controlled by a higher structure, because a lot of radio and television in that age was very sort of, in the early 20th century, was very controlled by people in power who essentially wanted to get at a certain agenda and message and had their own interests at heart. It's very complex to relay, but it was more controlled than it is now. So regardless of that, though, it was delivering a new sort of power, a new sort of agency to the people. This is what information represents, you must understand. Information, entertainment, exchange of ideas, exchange of emotions, exchange of realities, exchange of current events, exchange of cultural trends. All of this represents a sort of optimization of the internal forces which allow us to exchange back. Once we have that distribution of information, once we have that distribution of events and of media and entertainment and music and whatever else, we start to sort of elevate into a place where we can conceive of a better future. We can conceive of a better time. We can conceive of a more autonomous world. And this has never been more pervasive than it is now in this information age, because you have people sharing from a place that is not bound by a gatekeeper. It is bound from a place within themselves, an inner structure, an inner power, authority that delivers this. And the internet and the prevailing sort of system is made in such a way where there's such an oversaturation of content that the most sort of sticky or adhesive is what survives and what prevails. And the most sticky and the most adhesive is generally that which resonates to the greatest amount of people and to the highest sort of bandwidth of human consciousness. And many people want to scorn the overwhelm of the information age, but they don't understand that what it is this ever dividing sort of organism which divides itself into these subsets, sub-bodies, sub-domains that each and every individual will feel drawn to navigate into as they need. So it represents this division of resource, this division of mind power, and this division of knowledge and expertise and mastery. And when this arises, you have people who are able to follow their inner sense of their resonance towards various topics, various fields, various domains, and they follow that inner resonance, and they sort of absorb the contents of whatever domain they need, and they move to the next domain, and they absorb the contents of that domain. And this is an actualized person I'm expressing. It's not a person who's going in and only learning it halfway and then pushing it aside. No, it's a person who understands the new system is one where we must follow our inner resonance towards the topics that call to us, absorb the nutrients from that domain as much as we feel we need to, and we will have an understanding of how much we need, and then they move to the next domain that calls to them. And from this, they are absorbing very specialized nutrients, which correspond to a very specialized sects of society. That was SECTS, by the way. Just clarifying. Very particular domains of society and domains of whatever field, whether it's science, philosophy, like very specialized, very, very delineated in their particular dimensions. And because of this, they are essentially harnessing and creating and crafting their own specialty, their own unique, entirely unique career path. And this is what is happening as we move into this new age. A new career path is being born. A new way of relating to life is being born because of the decentralization that occurred with the information output through the internet, through the networks, through the connections, through the mass wave of people all aligning and finding their place and reaching each other, and it's absolutely brilliant. But it does require a new form of understanding how to navigate this. So back to Mercury. If you think about information, it is always a liberator, and it can be a if you think back to the times of when it was very much controlled and directed under central authority figures, it can also be a damning force. So lack of information, or even the wrong information put forth as reality and influencing our perception, is very dangerous. But then if you have the flip side of that, where the organic accumulation of a vast network of information is a very powerful force and grants us imaginable freedom and creative agency and the ability to build whatever life we wish. This is the thing about this new age, is that it is an age where people are required to forge their own way forward. We are each going to have our own path. We are each going to have our own journey. We are each going to have our own sort of title or label or specialization within an industry that is probably going to be entirely our own, as accumulated from each of these subsets of knowledge domains that we harness and pull together. It's very much about the liberation that occurs with information. And information in the mercurial form is it's very much like hot and quick, and it can be overwhelming, yes, but in understood like wielding a fire or a flame, you can take it and you can allow it to shed off all the dead skin and bring you to life in a very new and refined way. So we are being asked to create ourselves in a new conception of what the human experience in the human life can actually be. There is such a wave of potential, and we must harness this. We must harness this within the chaos. We must not fight against our perceived oppressors. We must instead harness the power that is available all around us and transform ourselves to rise above whatever oppressors we believed we had. This is what is required. And oppression does exist, but the thing about oppression that we must understand is we can only ever be oppressed if we let that oppression contain us. If we let those beliefs and those ideologies and those perceptions of others keep us down and keep us limited and keep us stuck within a certain feeling of the world is against me. The truth is, the world is never against you. The world can be undeniably cruel. The world and our experiences can be ridiculously unnerving and painful and heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. It can make us believe we are small when we are, in fact, incredibly expansive. But we are only ever bound by those fluctuations of the world at us if we let them define us. If we allow them to become a narrative that seeps into every component of our life and determines how we relate to opportunity. We must understand that oppression cannot prevail for the empowered. Oppression cannot hold on to that which is free. Oppression cannot chain itself to anything that is functioning above it. So essentially, we rise above oppression. We don't try to fix it. Oppression can never be fixed. It's a force that is embedded in human psyche, and you can't just eradicate something like that just because of sheer amounts of harvesting and pushing forward and trying to get out a message. No, we have to rise above it, and we have to do this through internal landscapes. We have to do this by claiming the fullness of our human being. And this is done by understanding the new model of development as most pervasive. Now, in this transition out of the over information age. It's not going to be the information age anymore because it is going to be defined by the meaning that we derive from the information. It will no longer be defined by information itself. It will be defined by the ability for us to draw massive stories out of massively beautiful, transformative stories out of the information. So it's no longer just billions of bits of data. It's going to be a new plane, a new constellation for us to build within ourselves and without ourselves and within our path and without. So in Mercury Media, my desire is to communicate through art, through journalism, through commentary, through the exchange of minds, the exchange of hearts, the exchange of creativity, a new understanding of the transformation that is at work. It is a desire to be an agent of that transformation through entertainment, through commentary, through all the dimensions of communication at its core. It is that powerful principle of networked exchange as a force of transformation, as a liberator. Because when something works sort of passively through liberation, people change at a much slower rate. When you acknowledge that something has liberating capacity, and you acknowledge and embrace that and actually augment it by working with it, then transformation happens at such an accelerated rate. It's unbelievable. It's so accelerated, so augmented, so massively potent. And we can take this and we can run with it and we can build a beautiful society where people feel fulfilled, where people feel where people feel as if they belong, where people understand their place within the web of things. We don't have to be so alienated. We don't have to be so isolated unto a quest of conquest and amassing resources and showing off and pretending like we're better than we actually feel inside. We can actually live a life of fulfillment. We can live connected to our people in a way that is free from the pain that we've known, that is free from the sense of dark bounds and domination. We can live on a scale much larger than we have ever envisioned. And I believe we should do it. And Mercury Media will be an agent of that ultimately. It will be waking everyone up to see that our greatest gift right now is our internal capacity for this change. Whatever that means. Whether this is expressed through art, through music, through personal revelation and personal stories, things that we have been through. It invites everyone to be a part of a movement, which is ultimately the expression of Mercury as liberated unto our own inner God. So we become the messenger, and we become the powerful force of liberation. We become the vision for a new tomorrow. And this is sublime. It's ultimately the utopian ideal that we never knew how to conceive, that we didn't understand was possible. We are moving towards that. We must only adapt to the new model and rise. And this is the overarching vision and the sublimity of my company. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for mass change, mass communication, and mass transmutation. This is the Namii Mercury Show.